The loneliest hearts are not always abandoned, sometimes they are simply waiting for the one soul brave enough to find them. Snow drifted through the towering pines like silent ghosts, covering the rugged peaks of Frost Hollow Mountain beneath a blanket of white that stretched farther than the eye could follow. The wind carried the scent of cedar, frozen earth, and distant rivers locked beneath thick sheets of ice, while somewhere high above, an eagle circled against the pale winter sky. Few people dared climb this mountain once the first snowfall arrived. The villagers whispered that spirits guarded its slopes, that wolves larger than horses wandered beneath the moon, and that anyone foolish enough to venture too far would never find the trail home again. Claire Bennett had stopped caring about those stories years ago. They frightened everyone except the woman who had already lost everything worth fearing. Long before sunrise painted silver across the eastern ridge, she was already awake, feeding dry pine logs into the old stone fireplace that warmed her tiny cabin. The familiar crackling filled the quiet room while soft amber light danced across weathered wooden walls lined with bundles of dried herbs, woven baskets, and shelves crowded with carefully labeled glass jars. Every object had earned its place through years of patient work. Nothing inside had come easily. Claire wrapped a thick wool shawl around her shoulders before stepping onto the narrow porch. The cold air immediately kissed her cheeks, carrying tiny flakes that settled into her long chestnut hair. She breathed deeply, closing her eyes for only a moment. Up here, silence never felt empty. It breathed beside her. The mountain had become the only neighbor who never judged her scent, never mocked the title she once carried, never reminded her she had been rejected before an entire pack. Down below, they still called her the rejected Omega. Up here, the forest knew only her footsteps. She smiled faintly as a pair of white rabbits emerged from beneath a fallen cedar log, already waiting near the edge of the clearing. They never seemed afraid of her. Claire reached into her apron pocket and scattered a handful of dried berries onto the snow. The rabbits hopped closer without hesitation, their tiny noses twitching eagerly while several bright red cardinals fluttered down from nearby branches to join the quiet morning feast. Watching them always made the mornings feel less lonely. Years ago, she had spent countless nights wondering if kindness mattered when no one was there to witness it. The mountain had answered her question in its own gentle way. Every injured bird she had sheltered eventually returned with spring. Every abandoned fawn she had nursed grew strong enough to disappear back into the forest. Every lonely sunrise reminded her that life continued whether someone applauded or not. She preferred that truth over promises made by wolves who measured worth through power alone. A distant rumble suddenly rolled across the mountainside. Claire lifted her head slowly. It wasn't thunder. The sky remained perfectly clear, washed in pale blue behind drifting clouds. The rabbits froze. The birds burst upward all at once, vanishing into the trees. Even the wind seemed to pause. Claire listened carefully, her heartbeat slowing instead of racing. Something had changed. Somewhere beyond the western ridge, hidden behind endless walls of pine and stone, an unfamiliar presence had entered the mountain. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It simply felt enormous, like an ancient oak casting a shadow long before anyone saw its trunk. She stood perfectly still, staring toward the distant forest where swirling snow concealed everything beyond 100 yards. For the first time in nearly 8 years, the mountain no longer felt as though it belonged only to her. And although Claire could not have explained why, a quiet voice deep inside her heart whispered that before this day ended, the life she had carefully buried beneath these silent peaks would begin breathing once again. Claire had once believed that home was a place where people waited for your footsteps at the end of the day. She had been wrong. 8 winters earlier, Frost Hollow Mountain had been nothing more than a distant outline beyond the valley where she was born. Back then, she still lived inside the Silver Creek Pack, where every sunrise began with the sounds of busy kitchens, children racing through the courtyard, and wolves greeting one another with easy smiles that never quite reached her. She remembered standing among them without ever truly belonging. The elders always found reasons to overlook her. The younger wolves lowered their voices whenever she walked past, believing she could not hear their whispers. Some called her fragile. Others called her strange. Claire simply learned to keep her head high and answer kindness with kindness, even when none was offered in return. Her grandmother had once told her that bitterness was a cage built from someone else's cruelty. Claire had promised herself she would never live inside it. That promise became the only thing she carried away from her old life. The rejection itself had not happened all at once. It had arrived slowly, hidden inside disappointed looks, quiet conversations that stopped whenever she entered the room, invitations that somehow never reached her door, and celebrations where everyone seemed to have a place except her. By the time the final words were spoken beneath the full moon, she already knew what they would be. The official ceremony lasted only minutes, but the silence afterward stayed with her for years. No one chased after her when she packed the few things she owned. No one asked where she planned to go. A few neighbors watched from behind their windows, then quietly closed the curtains as if watching a snowfall disappear. Claire walked until the village lights vanished behind endless trees. She crossed frozen streams, climbed rocky paths, and followed no map except the instinct that told her to keep moving forward. On the third day she found the abandoned cabin tucked beneath towering evergreens, its roof sagging beneath old snow and its chimney leaning slightly toward the valley below. Most people would have seen a broken shelter ready to collapse. Claire saw something different. She saw quiet. She saw space to breathe. She saw a place where nobody expected her to prove she deserved to exist. The first winter nearly defeated her. She had never chopped enough firewood to survive months of snow. She had never trapped fish beneath frozen water or learned which mountain herbs remained safe after heavy frost. She made mistakes. She cried more than once when the wind found its way through the cabin walls at night. Yet every morning she stood again. Little by little the mountain became less like an enemy and more like an old teacher whose lessons demanded patience instead of strength. Spring eventually arrived carrying green shoots through melting snow, and with it came wounded birds, lost foxes, hungry deer, and travelers who occasionally wandered too far before finding her tiny cabin. Claire never turned anyone away. She shared soup when she had enough. She wrapped injured ankles with clean cloth. She pointed strangers towards safe trails without asking for payment or names. Most never recognized the lonely woman living above the clouds. That was exactly how she preferred it. Years slipped quietly past until the seasons blended together like familiar songs. She no longer counted birthdays. She no longer wondered whether anyone remembered the girl who had disappeared from Silver Creek. The mountain had given her something far more valuable than acceptance. It had given her peace. Yet as she stood outside her cabin that cold morning, watching fresh snow drift between the ancient pines while the strange feeling lingered in the still air, an old instinct she believed had faded forever stirred deep inside her chest. It was not fear. It was not hope. It felt like destiny taking its first careful step across the frozen mountain toward her door. The strange feeling refused to leave. Claire carried it with her as she slipped a woven basket over her shoulder and followed the narrow trail winding deeper into the forest. Snow crunched beneath her sturdy leather boots, leaving the only fresh footprints across the untouched hillside. Morning sunlight filtered through towering pine branches, scattering ribbons of gold across the frozen ground while tiny crystals sparkled like scattered stars. Normally she noticed every familiar sound around her. The chatter of squirrels gathering pine cones, the cheerful tapping of woodpeckers, the distant rush of the creek hidden beneath sheets of ice. Today the mountain sounded different. It was quieter, almost as if the forest itself were listening. Claire paused beside a cluster of evergreen shrubs where bright winter berries peeked through the snow. She gently brushed away the frost before gathering only what she needed, leaving plenty behind for the animals. That had always been her way. The mountain had taught her that survival was never about taking everything. It was about leaving enough so tomorrow could still arrive. As she continued uphill, she stopped beside a weathered oak where strips of cloth fluttered softly from a low branch. Travelers occasionally tied pieces of fabric there after finding safety during heavy storms. None of them knew who quietly repaired the trail each spring or stacked dry firewood beneath sheltered rocks before winter arrived. Claire never waited to be thanked. She simply believed kindness should exist even when nobody knew its name. A sudden rustling broke the stillness. She turned to find a young mountain goat standing awkwardly near a rocky ledge, one front hoof caught between two loose stones. The frightened animal froze the moment their eyes met. Claire slowly lowered her basket and knelt several feet away, careful not to move too quickly. Her voice remained soft enough to blend with the whispering wind. "It is all right. Nobody is chasing you." The goat watched her cautiously, its breathing gradually slowing as Claire edged closer, one careful step at a time. She gently lifted the trapped hoof free without forcing it, then stepped back immediately. For several long seconds the animal remained perfectly still before testing its footing. Finding itself unharmed, it gave one curious glance toward the quiet woman before disappearing gracefully across the snowy ridge. Claire smiled to herself. Moments like that reminded her why she had stayed. Out here, trust was never demanded. It was earned through patience. She reached the western overlook shortly before noon, where the entire valley stretched beneath the mountain like a painted landscape. Tiny columns of smoke rose from distant chimneys far below, marking villages she had not visited in years. Somewhere among them stood the place where she had once imagined her future. The memory no longer hurt. It simply felt like another lifetime belonging to someone else. As she turned away from the overlook, something unusual caught her attention. A line of enormous tracks crossed the untouched snow several hundred feet away, disappearing between ancient cedar trees. Claire slowly approached, curiosity replacing caution. She crouched beside the first print, placing her gloved hand carefully inside it. Her fingers did not reach halfway across. Whatever had passed through the mountain carried the weight of an exceptionally large wolf, yet the stride between each print suggested calm confidence instead of panic or pursuit. Fresh snow had only begun settling inside the tracks. They could not have been more than an hour old. Claire stood silently, her eyes following the trail as it vanished deeper into the forest she believed she knew better than anyone. Then the wind shifted. It carried a scent she had never encountered before. Clean winter air mixed with cedar, distant rain, and something ancient that stirred every instinct quietly sleeping within her heart. She did not know the name of the stranger walking her mountain, but for the first time since choosing a life of solitude, Claire found herself following someone else's footsteps instead of her own. The trail climbed steadily through towering evergreens until the massive footprints disappeared beneath a curtain of snow-laden branches, leaving Claire standing in a silence so complete that she could hear her own breathing. She scanned the forest floor carefully, searching for another sign, but the mountain had already begun hiding its newest visitor beneath drifting flakes. She knew these woods better than anyone alive. Every stream, every narrow ridge, every twisted cedar had become part of her memory over the years. Nothing crossed Frost Hollow without leaving a story behind. Yet this trail seemed determined to become a mystery instead. Claire adjusted the basket on her shoulder and continued deeper into the western forest, guided less by sight than by instinct. The air felt unusually warm despite the winter cold, carrying the faint scent she had noticed moments earlier. It reminded her of pine after fresh rain, mixed with stone that had rested beneath centuries of snowfall. It was unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. As she rounded a cluster of granite boulders, she noticed broken pine branches nearly 12 feet above the ground. Her eyes narrowed. No ordinary wolf could have reached that height. Even the largest elk rarely brushed those upper limbs. Whatever had passed through here possessed remarkable size, but surprisingly little destruction. The trees remained standing. The undergrowth had barely been disturbed. It was the careful path of something powerful that had no need to prove its strength. Claire gently touched one of the freshly snapped branches, still damp with frozen sap. It had happened recently. Very recently. A distant raven called from somewhere beyond the ridge. Then another answered. The mountain often spoke through its animals, and over the years Claire had learned to notice when familiar patterns changed. Today every bird seemed to be watching the western valley. Even the wind carried itself differently, flowing around the trees instead of through them. She reached a small frozen creek where crystal-clear water still trickled beneath a thin sheet of ice. Kneeling carefully, she filled a wooden flask before pausing. Across the stream lay another enormous footprint pressed into the snow beside the water's edge. Unlike the others, this one revealed something unexpected. The edges were uneven, as though the traveler had briefly lost balance before continuing forward. Claire studied it quietly. Her years on the mountain had taught her to read signs beyond what most people noticed. The stride remained long, but the weight distribution had shifted slightly. Whoever had walked here was growing tired. Her fingers rested against the smooth wooden flask while concern quietly replaced curiosity. The mountain was unforgiving during winter. Even experienced hunters struggled when storms arrived without warning. She stood and looked toward the darkening western sky. Heavy gray clouds had begun gathering over the highest peaks much sooner than expected. By late afternoon the narrow trails would disappear beneath fresh snow. Anyone unfamiliar with the mountain could easily lose their way. Claire hesitated. 8 years of solitude had taught her not to become involved in the lives of strangers. The mountain had offered peace precisely because she stopped chasing the troubles of the outside world. Yet another lesson had stayed with her far longer than loneliness ever could. If someone needed help and she chose to walk away, the silence afterward would follow her forever. She released a slow breath and changed direction, following the fading trail instead of returning home. The footprints led toward Black Ridge, one of the oldest parts of Frost Hollow, where towering cliffs sheltered hidden caves untouched by most travelers. Snow began falling again, soft at first, then steadily thicker until the distant trees faded into white shadows. Claire pulled her hood over her hair and quickened her pace. Somewhere ahead, beyond the curtain of swirling snow, someone was walking alone across a mountain that showed mercy to no one. She still did not know his name, nor why someone of such extraordinary size had climbed into the wilderness in the heart of winter. She only knew that with every step she took, the feeling growing inside her heart became impossible to ignore. Destiny was no longer approaching from afar. It was waiting just beyond the next ridge. Snow fell harder with every passing minute until the world around Claire became little more than shifting shades of white and gray. The familiar trail vanished beneath fresh powder, leaving only the enormous footprints to guide her forward. She moved carefully, her breathing steady, every sense sharpened by years of surviving the mountain's unpredictable moods. The wind carried that strange scent again, stronger now, mixed with the crisp smell of fresh snow and evergreen. It no longer felt distant. Whoever had crossed these woods was close. Very close. Claire rounded a massive granite outcrop where the trees opened into a small clearing sheltered from the worst of the storm. For one brief heartbeat, everything stood perfectly still. Then she saw him. A man rested against the base of an ancient pine, his broad shoulders partially covered by drifting snow as though winter itself had begun trying to hide him. Even seated, he looked impossibly tall. His long dark coat blended with the shadows beneath the trees, while strands of black hair, dusted with frost, framed a face that remained calm despite obvious exhaustion. Claire had never seen anyone built like him before. His frame was powerful without appearing threatening, and his hands, resting quietly beside him, looked capable of lifting fallen timber with ease. Yet it was not his size that held her attention. It was the remarkable stillness surrounding him. The forest seemed to pause in quiet respect. Birds remained silent. Even the wind curved gently around the clearing before disappearing into the trees. Claire remained several yards away, allowing the stranger every opportunity to notice her first. She had learned long ago that frightened people often reacted before they thought. After several seconds without movement, she spoke softly. "You have been walking for a long time." Her voice blended naturally with the whispering snowfall. The man's silver eyes slowly lifted toward her. They were unlike any she had ever seen, clear as winter rivers beneath moonlight, carrying both remarkable strength and profound weariness. He studied her without suspicion, almost as though he had expected someone to appear. Claire noticed his breathing had become slower than it should have been in the freezing air. Tiny crystals clung to his coat, and one gloved hand rested against his side as though protecting a place that had grown painfully stiff from the cold. She did not ask questions. The mountain had taught her that every traveler carried a story they might not yet be ready to tell. Instead, she quietly removed the wool blanket tied beneath her basket and stepped closer until she could gently place it beside him. "The storm will become much worse before sunset," she said. "No one stays outside through a frost-hollow blizzard." The stranger glanced at the blanket before looking back at her. His voice, when it finally came, was deep and calm, carrying the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. "You should return home before the trail disappears." Claire almost smiled. Even now he was more concerned about her than himself. "My home is less than a mile from here," she answered. "You are the one far from shelter." For a moment neither of them spoke. Snow continued settling across the clearing until the world seemed wrapped inside peaceful silence. Then the stranger attempted to rise. He reached his full height only briefly before his balance shifted, forcing him to steady himself against the great pine. Claire instinctively stepped forward, offering her arm without hesitation. He looked down at her, clearly surprised that someone nearly a foot shorter than he was would even try to help. "You do not have to carry everything alone," she said gently. Something changed in his expression then. It was small, almost impossible to notice, yet the guarded distance inside his silver eyes softened ever so slightly. Without another word, he accepted her offered support. Together they turned toward the snow-covered trail leading back to the quiet cabin where Claire believed she lived alone. Neither of them realized that the mountain had already begun weaving their separate paths into a single destiny. The walk back to the cabin was slow, not because the distance was great, but because the storm had transformed every familiar landmark into a curtain of swirling white. Claire stayed close enough to guide the stranger around hidden rocks and narrow slopes, yet she never hurried him or asked unnecessary questions. Something about the quiet between them felt natural, as though the mountain itself approved of silence more than conversation. By the time the small cabin appeared through the snow, smoke was already rising from the stone chimney, a thin ribbon of warmth against the gray afternoon sky. Claire pushed open the sturdy wooden door, and the scent of cedar, dried herbs, and fresh bread welcomed them inside. The stranger paused at the entrance, his silver eyes slowly taking in the modest room. Everything reflected careful hands rather than wealth. A rough wooden table stood beside the fireplace. Shelves held jars filled with herbs, berries, and preserved vegetables gathered through every season. Thick quilts rested neatly on a simple bed beneath the window, while bundles of lavender and pine hung from the ceiling, filling the air with a gentle fragrance that somehow made the storm outside seem farther away. Claire removed her damp cloak and hung it beside the door before placing another dry blanket near the fire. "Please sit," she said quietly. "The mountain always takes more strength than people expect." The stranger lowered himself onto the sturdy chair beside the fireplace with measured movements. The orange glow of the flames softened the sharp lines of his face, revealing someone who appeared younger than the burden carried inside his eyes. Claire filled a cast-iron kettle with fresh spring water and placed it above the fire. Soon the comforting sound of gently bubbling water filled the room. She added mountain mint, dried chamomile, and a pinch of cedar needles gathered during autumn. The familiar routine settled her thoughts. Caring for others had always been easier than speaking about herself. After several minutes she handed him a warm wooden cup. "Drink slowly. It will help after breathing cold air all day." He accepted it with surprising care, his large hands making the simple cup appear almost delicate. After one sip, his expression changed ever so slightly. "You know these mountains well," he observed. Claire smiled faintly as she stirred a pot of vegetable soup simmering above the fire. "The mountain has been my teacher for a long time." He studied her quietly. "Do you always bring strangers home?" She shook her head. "There are not many strangers willing to climb this high in winter." A hint of amusement appeared in his eyes, disappearing almost as quickly as it arrived. "Then perhaps I should consider myself fortunate." The words carried no arrogance, only quiet gratitude. Claire placed a bowl of steaming soup before him along with thick slices of homemade bread. He hesitated for only a moment before accepting the meal. Watching someone of his extraordinary size eat with such calm restraint made her realize how carefully he carried his strength. Nothing about him demanded attention. Even his silence felt respectful rather than distant. Outside, the wind rattled the cabin windows while snow continued piling against the porch. Claire glanced through the frosted glass before returning another log to the fire. "The storm will last until morning," she said. "You should remain here tonight." He looked toward the dancing flames before meeting her eyes again. "You trust people very easily." Claire considered the question before answering. "No. I trust what people choose to do after they believe no one is watching." The room grew quiet once more. Somewhere outside, the wind carried the distant howl of wolves across the mountainside, yet the sound seemed strangely far away. The stranger lowered his gaze to the warm cup resting between his hands, and for the first time in many years, he felt something he had almost forgotten could still exist. Peace. Neither of them noticed that beneath the table, where the firelight could not quite reach, a small silver crest stitched into the inside of his weathered coat briefly caught the flickering glow before disappearing once again into shadow. Morning arrived quietly beneath a sky washed in pale silver. The storm had moved east during the night, leaving Frost Hollow wrapped in untouched snow that reflected the first rays of sunlight like scattered crystal. Claire stepped onto the porch carrying a small bucket, intending to gather fresh water from the nearby spring before breakfast. The cold air felt calm again, but something about the silence was different. It no longer carried peace. It carried expectation. She paused, listening. Then she heard it. Not the sound of wolves or mountain birds, but the distant rhythm of many boots pressing into fresh snow with practiced precision. Claire slowly turned toward the lower trail winding through the pines. Dark figures appeared one after another between the trees, moving with disciplined purpose. There were at least a dozen of them, each wearing heavy winter cloaks fastened with polished silver clasps that caught the morning light. Their movements were efficient, coordinated, and unmistakably military. She had not seen an organized patrol anywhere near Frost Hollow in years. Instinctively, Claire placed the bucket beside the porch and waited rather than retreating indoors. Running from visitors had never solved anything. Within moments the group stopped several yards from the cabin. The man leading them stepped forward. His broad shoulders were wrapped in a dark cloak trimmed with gray fur, and a silver wolf emblem rested proudly across his chest. His sharp blue eyes swept across the small cabin, the neatly stacked firewood, the herb garden sleeping beneath snow, and finally settled on Claire. He seemed surprised to find someone living here at all. "You live alone?" he asked, his tone respectful but direct. Claire gave a small nod. "I do." The man's gaze shifted toward the chimney where smoke continued rising steadily into the crisp morning air. "We are searching for someone." Claire remained calm. Many people become lost in these mountains during winter. One of the younger guards behind him let out a quiet breath that sounded almost impatient. "Not this traveler," he muttered. "He is not an ordinary man." The leader silenced him with a glance before returning his attention to Claire. "Have you seen anyone pass through this area within the last day?" Claire hesitated only briefly. She remembered the stranger seated peacefully beside her fireplace, still asleep after the exhausting journey through the storm. She also remembered the quiet gratitude in his silver eyes. "Yes," she answered honestly. "I found someone caught in yesterday's blizzard." Several guards exchanged immediate looks. Relief flashed across more than one face. The leader took a single careful step forward. "Where is he?" Claire met his gaze without lowering her own. "Resting inside." Before another word could be spoken, one of the younger guards moved around his commander, his expression tightening as he looked toward the cabin. His eyes landed briefly on Claire's simple clothing before narrowing with quiet dismissal. "An Omega," he said under his breath, though loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Of all places." Another guard frowned. "She has no idea who she has sheltered." Claire noticed the change immediately. The gratitude that had softened the group only moments earlier disappeared beneath assumptions she knew far too well. They no longer looked at her as the woman who had protected a stranger during a storm. They saw only the title she had spent years leaving behind. The leader appeared uncomfortable with their reaction but did not interrupt. "We must bring him back immediately," he said. "Open the door." Claire glanced once toward the quiet cabin behind her before looking back at the men standing in the snow. Her voice remained gentle, yet steady enough to stop the morning wind itself. "He spent the night recovering from the mountain. If he chooses to leave, I will not stop him. But no one enters my home without first being welcomed." For several long seconds the clearing became perfectly silent. The guards stared at the quiet woman standing alone before them, unable to understand how someone with no title, no rank, and no army could speak with such calm certainty. Behind the frosted cabin window, unseen by everyone outside, a pair of silver eyes had quietly opened, and every word spoken on that snowy porch had already reached the man they had crossed an entire kingdom to find. No one moved. The cold morning air settled over the clearing while tiny snowflakes drifted lazily between the towering pines, softening every sharp edge except the growing tension that lingered between the cabin and the visitors standing outside it. Claire remained on the porch with one hand resting lightly against the weathered wooden railing. She was alone, dressed in a simple wool dress beneath her heavy shawl, facing a company of disciplined warriors whose polished boots and silver insignias reflected authority she had long ago chosen to leave behind. Yet she did not appear frightened. The young guard who had spoken dismissively earlier stepped forward before his commander could answer. His jaw tightened as he looked directly at Claire. "You do not understand the seriousness of this situation," he said. "The man inside cannot remain here." Claire met his impatient stare without raising her voice. "He remained here because the storm gave him no safer choice. That is no longer your decision." His words carried the certainty of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. Claire quietly folded her hands together against the cold. "It becomes my decision the moment someone crosses the doorway of my home." Several guards exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had expected resistance from the woman they had mistaken for nothing more than a forgotten mountain recluse. The commander slowly exhaled, choosing his next words carefully. "We have searched throughout the kingdom for 2 days. Hundreds of people have been worried." Claire nodded gently. "Then I am glad your search has ended." "Then please step aside. When he chooses to walk out, I will." The younger guard shook his head in disbelief. "You truly have no idea who he is?" Claire answered honestly. "No. I only know the person I found sitting alone in the snow. He accepted warm tea with gratitude. He thanked me for a bowl of soup. He slept peacefully after a long journey. That is all I needed to know." Her quiet answer settled over the clearing more heavily than the snowfall itself. Even the commander found no immediate reply. The younger guard looked almost offended by her calmness. "You speak as though titles mean nothing." Claire's expression softened with quiet sadness rather than defiance. "Titles matter to kingdoms. Kindness matters to people." The words lingered in the cold air. Somewhere high above, a raven crossed the pale sky with slow, steady wings before disappearing beyond the ridge. The commander lowered his eyes briefly, as though remembering something long forgotten, but the younger guard stepped forward again. This time he placed one boot upon the first porch step. "Enough. We cannot delay any longer." Claire did not retreat. She simply took one small step until she stood directly before the cabin door. There was no challenge in her posture, only quiet resolve. "Please do not make this more difficult than it needs to be," she said softly. "He deserves one peaceful morning after everything the mountain demanded of him." The younger guard opened his mouth to protest, but another sound interrupted him. The cabin door behind Claire opened slowly with the familiar creak of old wood. Warm light from the fireplace spilled gently across the snow-covered porch. Every guard instinctively straightened. Claire turned slightly, surprised to see the stranger standing quietly in the doorway. His dark coat had been brushed clean of snow, though he still wore the simple clothes she had dried beside the fire. The morning light revealed his remarkable height even more clearly than before. He looked rested now, his silver eyes calm as winter lakes beneath clear skies. Without haste, he stepped onto the porch beside Claire. His gaze moved across the assembled guards until it rested upon their commander. No one spoke. Then something extraordinary happened. The commander slowly lowered his head. One by one, every guard followed, placing a closed fist over the center of their chest. The young warrior who had questioned Claire only moments earlier stared in stunned silence before doing the same. Claire looked from the kneeling men to the quiet stranger beside her, confusion filling her eyes. She still did not know his name. But as the mountain breeze lifted the edge of his dark coat, the hidden silver crest stitched inside caught the sunlight once more, and for the first time she realized that the man she had welcomed into her lonely cabin carried a presence that even the proudest warriors greeted with unquestioned respect. The clearing remained completely still. Snow drifted softly between the kneeling guards, settling upon their cloaks and shoulders while none of them dared lift their heads. Claire stood frozen beside the stranger, searching his calm expression for an explanation that refused to come. Nothing about the quiet man who had shared tea beside her fireplace matched the silent respect now surrounding him. Yet he seemed neither surprised nor pleased by it. Instead, he simply looked at the commander with the same composed eyes she had seen since the moment they met. "Stand," he said quietly. His deep voice carried no anger, yet every guard immediately obeyed without hesitation. The commander stepped forward first, lowering his gaze respectfully. "Your Majesty," he said, "the council has been searching every valley since yesterday morning. We feared the storm had delayed your return beyond the northern pass." Claire's breath caught ever so slightly. "Your Majesty." The words echoed inside her thoughts like distant church bells across the mountains. She slowly looked toward the man beside her. "King." That single truth suddenly connected every unanswered question. The extraordinary size. The quiet confidence. The disciplined guards. The silver crest hidden inside his coat. Yet somehow the revelation did not change the person she had come to know over the past day. He still looked like the traveler who had thanked her for warm soup and listened patiently while the fire crackled beside them. The commander continued carefully. "The council requests your immediate return to Blackwood Castle. Delegations from 5 territories have already arrived." The man nodded once but did not move. Instead, he turned toward Claire. "May I return your blanket before I leave?" His question surprised everyone standing in the clearing. Claire blinked, then looked toward the folded wool blanket resting neatly over the porch railing where it had dried overnight. A faint smile touched her lips despite the growing confusion. "You may keep it until your journey is finished," she answered softly. "The mountain can still be cold." The younger guard stared openly, unable to understand why the ruler of the Northern Territories would pause to discuss a simple blanket while important officials waited for him across the kingdom. Before he could stop himself, he spoke. "Your Majesty, she." The king lifted one hand slightly. The young guard fell silent immediately. Rowan's silver eyes remained on Claire. "Thank you for opening your home to a stranger." She shook her head gently. "You were never a stranger after you crossed my doorway." Those simple words seemed to settle deeply inside him. For the first time since the guards had arrived, genuine warmth appeared in his expression. Not the polite courtesy expected of a king, but quiet gratitude from a man who had found unexpected kindness where he least expected it. The commander noticed it too, and surprise briefly crossed his face. Claire looked toward the assembled guards, then back at Rowan. "I hope they did not spend too long worrying." Rowan glanced toward his men before answering. "Long enough to climb a mountain they usually avoid." A few of the guards exchanged embarrassed smiles. Even the younger one lowered his eyes, remembering his earlier assumptions. Claire folded her arms against the cold breeze. "Then I suppose they should have something warm before traveling back." Several guards looked up at once, clearly caught off guard by the invitation. Rowan studied her quietly. "After everything this morning, you would still welcome them?" Claire looked toward the snow-covered forest where sunlight filtered gently through the pines. "The mountain taught me something many years ago. If kindness depends on how someone treats me first, then it is only another form of bargaining." Silence followed her words. The wind stirred softly through the evergreens while no one found an answer worth speaking. Rowan slowly turned toward his commander. The council can wait 1 more hour. A ripple of astonishment spread through the gathered guards. Meetings involving kings were never delayed without extraordinary reason. Yet Rowan had already made his decision. He looked back toward the small cabin where smoke continued rising peacefully into the bright winter sky. "There is still time," he said quietly, "to share breakfast with the woman who reminded us all what true honor looks like." Breakfast was simple, yet it filled the little cabin with a warmth that no grand banquet could have matched. Fresh bread rested beside a pot of vegetable soup, while the scent of mountain herbs drifted through the room with every curl of steam rising from the kettle. Claire moved quietly between the fireplace and the table, serving each guest exactly as she had served the stranger the night before. She did not offer more to the king than she offered the youngest guard. In her home, every traveler deserved the same kindness. The guards accepted their bowls with respectful gratitude, though many still glanced toward Rowan in disbelief. Never in their years of service had they imagined sharing breakfast inside a forgotten cabin high above the clouds while their king sat at a rough wooden table, speaking more as a man than a ruler. Rowan watched Claire as she returned to her own seat. She never hurried. Every movement reflected years of quiet routine shaped by solitude rather than ceremony. She thanked the mountain before taking her first bite, just as she thanked the earth before gathering herbs or lighting the morning fire. Nothing she did sought admiration. It simply revealed who she had become after years of living beyond the reach of judgment. The commander finally broke the comfortable silence. "Your Majesty, the council will certainly ask why you traveled into Frost Hollow alone." Rowan rested his cup upon the table before answering. "Then they will hear the truth." Every eye turned toward him. Even Claire looked up with quiet curiosity. Rowan's silver gaze drifted toward the frosted window where endless white peaks stretched beneath the bright winter sky. "I did not come here to hunt," he said calmly. "Nor did I come to escape my responsibilities." He paused, as though choosing words he rarely spoke aloud. "I came because an old map described this mountain as the place where forgotten promises find their way home." The room fell completely silent. One of the older guards exchanged a puzzled glance with the commander, clearly hearing those words for the first time. Claire lowered her spoon without realizing it. Something inside her stirred gently, though she could not explain why. Rowan continued in the same calm voice. "For generations, the royal archives have preserved stories dismissed as legends. They speak of a woman whose heart would remain unchanged by fear, titles, or power. Someone who would offer shelter before asking for a name. Someone who would remind a weary king that compassion cannot be commanded. It can only be freely given." The commander looked stunned. "Your Majesty, you mean the mountain prophecy?" Rowan gave a single nod. "Many believed it was only a story. I no longer do." Claire looked from one face to another before quietly shaking her head. "You cannot be speaking about me." Rowan met her eyes. "Can I not?" She smiled politely, almost embarrassed. "I am only a woman who lives alone and grows herbs. You are also the only person who welcomed a stranger without asking what he could offer in return." His answer came gently, without the slightest trace of exaggeration. Claire searched his expression for royal courtesy, expecting to find simple gratitude disguised as praise. Instead she found complete sincerity. The younger guard who had doubted her lowered his eyes toward the wooden floor. Shame colored his face as memories of his earlier words returned. Rowan noticed him and spoke quietly enough that only those inside the cabin could hear. "Yesterday, every one of you searched the mountain for your king. She searched the mountain for a person." The difference settled over the room with unexpected weight. No one attempted to defend themselves. No one argued. They all understood exactly what he meant. Outside, sunlight poured across the untouched snow until the entire valley shimmered beneath a brilliant winter sky. Claire slowly turned toward the window, unaware that far below, riders from neighboring territories were already climbing the lower trails, carrying news that the king had been found. None of them knew that the greatest discovery made upon Frost Hollow was not the return of a ruler. It was the quiet woman whose kindness had awakened a promise that had waited generations to be fulfilled. By the time breakfast ended, the cabin no longer felt like the quiet refuge Claire had known for 8 peaceful years. It had become the center of something far larger than she could understand. Outside, the crisp mountain air carried distant echoes that had nothing to do with the forest. More horses were climbing the lower trails. More voices drifted upward with the wind. News traveled quickly through the northern territories whenever the king was involved, and even these remote peaks could not remain hidden forever. Claire gathered the empty bowls and carried them to the wash basin near the window. She had always believed ordinary tasks helped settle extraordinary thoughts. Warm water, clean dishes, and the familiar scent of lavender soap reminded her that life continued one quiet moment at a time. Behind her, Rowan stepped toward the stone fireplace where his coat still hung drying beside the flames. He carefully lifted it from the wooden peg and paused before slipping it over his shoulders. For the first time since arriving, the silver crest stitched inside the collar rested openly against the dark fabric, catching the morning light with unmistakable clarity. It was beautifully crafted, yet Claire found herself studying the man wearing it more than the symbol itself. Somehow the title of king still felt smaller than the quiet traveler she had welcomed into her home. A knock sounded gently against the cabin door. The commander opened it after receiving Rowan's nod. Another messenger entered, removing his hood before bowing deeply. Snow dusted his shoulders from the difficult climb. "Your Majesty," he said respectfully, "representatives from the Eastern Territories have reached the lower pass. They await your instructions." Rowan thanked him with a slight nod but did not immediately answer. Instead, he looked toward Claire, who had quietly returned the last wooden bowl to its shelf. "How many winters have you lived here?" he asked. She thought for a moment before smiling softly. "Long enough to stop counting." "Have you never wished to leave?" Claire glanced toward the window where endless white peaks stretched beneath the clear blue sky. "At first, I believed I was hiding from the world. Eventually I realized I had simply found the place where my heart could breathe." Rowan listened without interrupting. The commander, the guards, and even the messenger remained silent, sensing that this conversation mattered more than the reports waiting below. Claire continued quietly. "People often believe loneliness is the hardest thing to survive. It is not. Pretending to be someone else every single day is far more exhausting." Her words settled deeply inside the room. Rowan lowered his gaze for a brief moment, almost as though recognizing something within himself. He had spent years carrying a crown that demanded certainty, strength, and endless decisions. Yet sitting beside Claire's fireplace had reminded him of something he had not felt since boyhood. The freedom to simply exist without expectation. He walked toward the front door and opened it slowly. Bright winter sunlight poured across the wooden floor while the snow-covered valley shimmered beneath the clear sky. Dozens of riders could now be seen far below, winding steadily toward the cabin. Rowan turned back toward his gathered guards. "Hear my words clearly." Every soldier immediately stood straighter. "This cabin stands under my personal protection from this day forward." The declaration echoed through the quiet room. The younger guard who had once questioned Claire lowered his head with sincere respect. Rowan continued calmly. "No traveler seeking shelter here shall be disturbed. No messenger, noble, hunter, or soldier will enter this place without her permission. That order carries my royal seal." The commander placed his fist across his chest. "It will be honored." Claire looked at Rowan in surprise. "That is not necessary." He smiled gently. "Perhaps not for you." His silver eyes met hers with quiet warmth. "But kindness should never have to defend its own door again." For a long moment neither of them spoke. The mountain breeze drifted gently through the open doorway, carrying the scent of pine and fresh snow between them. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a lone eagle soared high above Frost Hollow, its wide wings gliding effortlessly across the endless winter sky, as though even nature itself understood that some promises were too important to remain only words. The riders reached the cabin just before noon, their horses moving carefully across the narrow mountain trail. Unlike the first group of guards, these visitors wore richly embroidered cloaks marked with the crests of neighboring territories. Advisors, elders, and respected leaders climbed down one after another, their conversations fading into silence the moment they saw Rowan standing beside Claire's small wooden porch instead of waiting beneath a royal banner. None of them had expected to find their king smiling beside a humble mountain home. An elderly council member with silver hair stepped forward first, bowing respectfully before Rowan. "Your Majesty, the council chambers have remained open since yesterday. Every kingdom has been awaiting your arrival." Rowan acknowledged him with a slight nod before speaking in the calm voice everyone recognized. "Then they have all demonstrated patience. They may continue demonstrating it a little longer." The older man looked surprised but accepted the answer without argument. His curious eyes drifted toward Claire. "May I ask who this lady is?" Before Claire could quietly introduce herself, another visitor suddenly stepped out from the newly arrived group. His face had aged noticeably, his once dark hair now streaked with gray, but Claire recognized him immediately. Ethan Holloway. He had once served among the elders of Silver Creek Pack. 8 years had changed his appearance, yet not enough to erase old memories. Ethan stared at Claire with widening eyes, almost unable to believe what he was seeing. "Claire?" he whispered. She looked at him politely, neither smiling nor frowning. "It has been a long time." Several nearby delegates exchanged puzzled glances. Ethan slowly removed his gloves, clearly unsettled. "Everyone believed you had disappeared forever." Claire answered gently. "I simply chose a quieter place to live." His shoulders lowered beneath a weight that had nothing to do with the cold. "Your father searched for you during the first spring." Claire listened without interrupting. "Your grandmother never stopped leaving flowers beneath the old oak near the northern gate." For a brief moment, emotion flickered quietly across Claire's face before settling once again into peaceful composure. She had imagined this conversation many times years ago. Back then she had dreamed of explanations, apologies, perhaps even justice. Standing here now, she realized none of those things carried the importance they once had. Ethan lowered his eyes. "We failed you." The words came slowly, stripped of excuses. "We watched you carry burdens that should never have belonged to one person. We saw your kindness and called it weakness because we did not understand it." Snowflakes drifted gently between them while no one spoke. The delegates, the guards, and even the council members remained perfectly still. Claire looked toward the surrounding mountains before answering. "Those years shaped who I became." Ethan's voice softened. "Can you forgive us?" She smiled with the quiet warmth that had comforted strangers, rescued frightened animals, and welcomed a weary traveler without knowing he wore a crown. "I forgave you a long time ago." Ethan blinked in surprise. "Then, why did you never return?" Claire's eyes wandered toward the cabin, the herb garden resting beneath snow, and the endless forest stretching beyond the ridge. Forgiveness does not always mean returning to the place where the wound began. Sometimes it simply means refusing to carry the pain any farther. Her answer settled over the gathering like sunlight breaking through winter clouds. Rowan watched her with silent admiration. No anger. No bitterness. No desire to prove anyone wrong. Only quiet peace earned through years of choosing compassion over resentment. The elderly council member slowly turned toward Rowan, his expression filled with understanding. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "perhaps the oldest prophecy was never about finding a future queen." Rowan looked at Claire as she bent to refill the bird's wooden feeder beside the porch, smiling as 2 small cardinals fluttered down without fear. "No," he replied with gentle certainty. "It was always about finding the woman who never allowed the world to change the goodness within her." The afternoon sun slowly descended behind the western peaks, painting the snow with shades of gold and amber that made Frost Hollow seem almost untouched by time. One by one, the visitors prepared to leave, their horses waiting patiently along the narrow trail while the mountain welcomed silence once more. The council members carried new understanding back to the kingdom. The guards carried quiet respect. Ethan carried forgiveness he never believed he would receive. Yet Rowan remained standing beside the little cabin, his eyes fixed on the woman gently sweeping fresh snow from the porch as though nothing remarkable had happened at all. Claire worked with the same peaceful rhythm she had followed every winter morning for years. She brushed snow from the wooden steps, checked the bird feeder hanging beneath the porch roof, and carefully placed another split log beside the fireplace before turning toward the fading sunlight. This had always been her life. Titles had arrived and departed with the visitors. The mountain had remained. Rowan walked toward the edge of the porch where endless ridges stretched beyond the horizon like waves frozen beneath the sky. "The view never grows old," he said quietly. Claire joined him, folding her hands inside the sleeves of her warm shawl. "Neither does gratitude." He looked at her with gentle curiosity. "Gratitude?" She smiled while watching snowflakes drift through the golden light. "Every morning I wake up healthy enough to gather firewood. Every spring another bird returns to the trees. Every autumn the herbs grow again. I learned that happiness often arrives disguised as ordinary days." Rowan remained silent for several moments. Throughout his years as king, he had heard speeches about victory, power, loyalty, wealth, and honor. Very few people had ever spoken about peace. Fewer still had truly understood it. Finally he turned toward her. "Claire." She looked up. His silver eyes reflected the fading colors of the evening sky. "Would you leave this mountain if I asked you to?" The question lingered gently between them. Claire did not answer immediately. Instead she looked across the quiet valley where soft trails of smoke rose from distant villages preparing for another winter evening. She thought about the frightened young woman who had climbed this mountain carrying nothing except heartbreak. She thought about the years that had slowly healed wounds no one else could see. Then she looked back at Rowan. "No," she answered honestly. "I would not leave simply because someone asked me to." Rowan smiled, and there was relief within that smile rather than disappointment. "That is exactly the answer I hoped you would give." He reached inside his coat and removed a small carved wooden token bearing the royal crest, placing it gently upon the porch railing instead of into her hands. "Then I will not ask you to leave your home." Claire looked at the simple token with quiet curiosity. Rowan continued. "If one day you wish to visit the kingdom, every gate will open for you. If you choose never to come, this mountain will remain under my protection for as long as I draw breath. The choice will always be yours." Claire looked from the token to the king standing before her. For the first time in many years, someone had offered her a future without demanding that she surrender herself to receive it. There were no conditions. No expectations. Only respect. She felt tears gently warm her eyes, though she smiled through them. "Thank you," she whispered. Rowan inclined his head with the same quiet courtesy he had shown from the beginning. He stepped down from the porch and walked toward his waiting horse before pausing one final time. The evening breeze carried his voice softly back across the snow. "Some people spend their entire lives searching for greatness," he said. "I climbed a mountain and discovered that greatness had been quietly living here all along." Claire watched him ride slowly down the winding trail until the last glimpse of his dark cloak disappeared beyond the pines. The forest settled into peaceful silence once again. A pair of cardinals landed beside the bird feeder while the first evening stars appeared above Frost Hollow. Claire picked up the small wooden token resting upon the porch rail and held it gently against her heart. She smiled toward the endless mountains that had once hidden her from the world. Somehow, without ever leaving them, she had finally found her way home.